Okay, bottom is in sight. We wanted to tell you that we have confirmed with nav that along large transect we're going to get a notification every 100 meters.
All right, watch it. Yeah, we have bottom in sight. We're just going to take a couple moments to get the vehicles
Sure,
ready.
no problem.
And
Thank
we'll
you for the
start it off
reminder.
shortly.
Want your swing arms out?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do lighting.
So which one should we do
Get
first?
some Z-bias adjusted.
Pilot, this is watch lead 1. Could we get a zoom on that fish? I should have waited. Sorry.
Yeah, to the left.
Yeah.
Copy, yeah. Do a quick zoom. We're still setting up.
Bridge
But
is
we can do a
already
quick
now.
zoom.
Go ahead, RV nav.
Have you guys completed that
Okay,
move?
everybody. We,
Video
I
this
have
is the
about
Okeanos
3 more
Explorer,
degrees.
beginning
Okay,
this dive
we
at the
just wanted to
Blake
let you know that
Escarpment.
the vehicles
We have
are
just
on the
reached the
bottom,
bottom at
and I'd like to take a
1,735
chance to
meters.
discuss a
It's a
quick
soft
bailout
sediment
plan.
bottom
Sure.
with
I'd like to
some
set the
a
bailout plan
snaffle-branched
to
eel,
southeast.
most likely. We're trying to get a zoom on that. We also have Leslie Sauter here
Yeah,
as
video
another
looks-
watch lead.
There's a lot going on.
Hi, everyone.
Exactly.
for a
If you
second.
could switch that over as soon as you guys are done moving.
And we'll take
I'll
a
do
few
that.
minutes
I'll
to
let you know.
settle
Thank
out,
you very
and then
much.
we'll start moving towards the escarpment wall.
Yeah, sorry, video. I got busy for a second.
Okay.
I wasn't able to hear anyone. I think we're almost there.
In some of these areas, we're likely to see broad, flat, sediment-covered areas like we're seeing here. And as we move toward these topography areas of relief, we're heading toward a scarp. We hope to find areas that don't have sediments. And when we see rock exposures, we often see invertebrates clinging onto those rocks. So that's what we're really looking for. You can see there's plenty of life in this environment, from the reminders they leave behind, the grazing paths
Nice
from
cover.
burrowing across the sand.
Great. The Z-bias, I think, is pretty good, and I think we're ready.
We don't see any ripple marks in the sand, which is telling us there's not a strong current in this area.
All right, watch leads. Vehicles are positioned, and we're ready to start the dive. So I'm just going to slowly maneuver around, and if you see anything when it zooms on, just let me know.
Roger that, pilot.
Come down a little for you.
Copy.
So throughout all of the dives, you'll see these two red dots. These are our laser beams, and we use them to assist in measuring, giving you a sense of the scale of some of these objects. They're very handy when we zoom in. They are spaced at 10 centimeters. So whatever they fall on, you'll know the size.
We're going to try starting the craft real quick, see if that helps.
Yeah, I see that.
Craft is like
If we get in too close, of course, we won't see those lasers. And we'll often turn them off so that we can get good video imagery without the red dots.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to get hydraulics to a pilot.
We're at a water depth of about 17, 20 meters.
All right, arms coming on. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, that's the one that they were looking. Oops.
Arm is live.
Oh well.
And rotating.
We're about to start heading toward the scarp.
All right, arms coming off.
It's drooping pretty low too. Try to bring it up a little.
That looks better.
Oopsie.
There we go. Is that better video?
Yes, it is.
Great.
Not seeing the shadows anymore.
Drifted up a little bit, coming down. And then, looks pretty flat. Do we want to get a move started?
Yeah. I think we do.
Copy that.
Is the ship still in that? Are they still?
Are they maneuvering?
This ship is currently stationary. We're ready to make a move whenever you guys were set up and ready to go.
Yeah? Do we do 30 meters?
Yeah, let's do 30 meters at a 328.
Sounds great.
A 328.
Spinning down hydraulics.
I will call it in.
Disabling.
Bridge, this is ROV Nav.
Go ahead, RV Nav.
Would like to make a quick move if you guys are ready.
I am ready.
All right, where I'd like to go 30 meters at 328 degrees, a speed of decimal 2, please.
Okay, that is 30 meters, bearing 328, speed decimal 2.
Good copy, Bridge. Thank you.
You're welcome. ROV
As
Nav,
we
bridge
pan
movement
around,
initiated.
you can see
Copy that, Bridge.
that
Thank you.
there are mounds, probably, what is that, Cheryl, from burrowing organisms, fish perhaps, maybe mollusks.
Yes, Leslie, I would imagine there are echinoderms that leave trails like this. There are holothurian sea cucumbers that might leave trails. The bigger burrows could be something more like fish. Oh, and there's
an echinoderm right
there's
there.
an echinoderm as we called them up.
Do you want a quick zoom at all, watch leads?
Yeah, that would be a great introductory echinoderm.
Sure. All right, video, you want to come on in?
Your auto heading's in, just so you know.
Thanks.
He's doing it already, don't it? Okay.
Partial.
You can take whatever you want, video. I'll just kind of center it.
It's moving along. It'd be nice to get a stable sit-down shot.
Do to kill lasers, co-pilot?
Lasers
I
out.
believe they call this one a pancake urchin, if I'm correct, and it has poisonous spines.
Let's come back into view, video.
Not happy with the white balance. It's looking pretty blue.
Copy, blue, white balance.
He's also kind of far away, I think.
That's
too.
true. I'm kind of drifting a little bit. All right, video, if you're happy, I think we can.
Maybe to zoom in tighter.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
That was me. Do you want another tight video?
Yeah, I
Kinda
haven't got
drifts down.
would not consider I've had a stable shot yet.
Copy that.
Maybe pull out wide, but you're getting
We're
between
likely
the
to see a
toes.
lot of echinoderms throughout our dives. They are pretty much everywhere.
Yes, echinoderms are one of those things that become more numerous as you get really deep. And that's a synaphobranchid eel in the background.
All right, video. We'll try that. Rotating.
Oh, that's a great shot.
Yeah. Looks like he has little boots on his tube feet.
And so the tube feet are a part of the water vascular system that they use for locomotion. As you can tell, as he's moving those feet around. Wow, and it has an isopod, looks like,
yeah.
Do a slight
parasite
rotate down.
on the left side.
Put feet in. There you go.
And if you look in the sediment, you can see little spines that have probably fallen off. Not this particular one, because he's still alive, but when these organisms die, very little of the shell part of the organism remains in the sediment record for geologists to look at the historical aspect of these sediments, but often the spines remain. And so I think you can see a few spines here and there on the seafloor.
And we have someone in the chat said that this is Aerosoma,
Pulling out a little bit
genus
before it's
Aerosoma.
Yep.
Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, video's clear.
Copy that.
That's great.
And come wide. And we'll move on.
And that sea urchin we just looked at, which is the common name, of course, was next to a brittle star, and they both belong to the same phylum, Echinodermata, but they're in different classes. And we'll see several of both, I suspect.
So how frequently do we see echinoderms on the soft sediment?
I would say that they're one of the more common organisms in the soft sediment, and it's interesting that different species will live in corals than necessarily on soft sediment. Brittle stars in all places, but different species potentially. And then also the urchins are usually different species when you get to hard substrate and corals.
That's much better. That's full wide there.
There are also lobsters that make burrows in soft sediment, blind lobsters. So that's another organism we might see.
These little knobs that we're seeing, it's interesting. You can see the trail of sediment moving to the right, to the left, excuse me, so that indicating that the current, at least for a while, has been from right to left. And so we get indicators in the sediments as to current directions and velocities. I mentioned a few minutes ago that there are not ripples in the sand, those undulating ripples like you might find on a beach. We see those on the sea floor because this is quite flat and without ripples. It's telling us there aren't strong currents here, but those trails behind these little mounds definitely tell us that there is some current. Yeah, it would be good to maybe zoom in on these to see if they're perhaps burrows, and there's a nice scour in between these.
How are we doing on that move?
Do you want to look in the burrow or
just completed
look at a trail?
1429. You feeling comfortable with another one, or
Yeah.
make another move, 30 meters, same
Pilot,
direction?
this is watch 2. If you could please zoom in on that area, that's wonderful, thanks.
Video, go for zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever's towards waypoint, new waypoint 2, yeah.
Copy that.
Partial.
Bridge,
So
this is
again,
ROV
the
now.
sediments are telling us
Go ahead,
something.
ROV
You can
Would
see
like to
that
make the exact
coarser
same move again,
material in the
30
low-lying
meters
area.
at
So
328 degrees,
that's
a
probably
speed
a
of
remnant from
0.2 knots.
scouring from
Okay, that's 30 meters.
it might
bearing
be
320,
currents
3.2.
induced by organisms,
thank you.
but it certainly is showing that the finer material has been removed or winnowed away, leaving only the coarse material. And a zoom in of that is showing us that this is wonderful. These are mostly pteropods, and you can also see those echinoderm spines. And we have a pteropod expert on board. maybe we could bring her in. This is Stephanie Burke of the Smithsonian.
Yeah, so actually pteropods are one of the things I study. Pteropods actually are snails that live in the water column, mostly the upper, from about the surface to 200 meters, although there are species that live deeper. So we're seeing a lot of shells, so the sort of diamond, triangle-shaped ones are some of the ones that you see in there. Once these animals die, their shell remains sink down to the bottom, and so we're seeing this nice pile of them mixed in, like Leslie said, with some urchin spines and other coarse type sediment.
Copy that.
That's great.
Suspect we're clear if you are.
And so that scouring has also exposed some of the underlying mud that is a little more cohesive. So you saw a little ledge there.
We have some interesting info from the chat room. It sounds like Les Watling said that these look like beaked whale feeding pits, and they saw them in the New England seamounts as well. Wow, that's exciting.
I would certainly never have thought of that one.
No,
that's
me
wonderful.
neither.
Thank you, Les.
Thank you, Les. And Michael Vecchione from the Smithsonian also agreed and has seen them in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
I have never seen one, so thank you.
Yeah. This is another synaphobranchid eel. I don't know if it's the same one that's following us, but they're pretty numerous in these kinds of depths. So.
All right, we'll let them go. Video. Let them swim out.
Should get one of those percentages when we get a good subject.
If anybody is interested in following up on the beak whale feeding pits, Peter Oster and Les Watling wrote a paper about it a few years ago. Mike Vecchione just noted that this is interesting because 1,700 meters is close to our maximum depth record for these beaked whales, and we are presently at 1,730 or so. So this would be a little bit deeper than they've been found or expected.
Another fish on your left. I think it's a similar fish.
Copy that. Drifting that way.
And we've also heard from Scott France, who is part of our team, but on shore. And he mentioned that those meandering trails that we're seeing throughout this portion of the dive could be burrowing trails from heart urchins. So a cousin to the one we're seeing. I don't believe that is a heart urchin. The one that we see is not. But heart urchins tend to burrow more, don't they? Yeah. And Les Watling mentions tilefish make a burrow also. But they sit in it head first. Maybe we'll capture one.
That's a nice percentage going off left.
Is it still in view?
No, just went off bottom left.
Copy that.
Dark object lower left.
We had an interesting note that from Mike Vecchione that he thinks that the beaked whales may be chasing squid into these depths, and so that's why they are hanging out near the bottom.
Seapen. You'll probably want to look at that close.
Washley, do you have any interest in this?
Seapen.
It's like a Seapen.
Wrong one.
Watch, is anyone interested in Seapen?
Oopsie. And
Oh, video, you can probably come more
I'm
at
getting all
that.
confused. Wrong one.
Yeah, you want to talk to.
Yes, Nav, that would be a good idea. Oh, wrong one. Wrong button, sorry. Operating difficulties. Yes, pilot, this is watch 1. We would like a zoom on that. Thank you.
Copy that. All right, video, let me get set up real quick, and you can go for zoom.
And also that move just got completed, so you guys should have plenty of time to settle down.
Copy.
Wonderful.
Little center on the bottom.
Centering.
Looks like you're still drifting forward.
Copy.
Okay, so we have a Seapen, our first cnidarian of the dive.
And back. Yes, that video.
ROV nav bridge move complete.
Copy that, Bridge. Thank you.
This is Stephanie Bush again. We commonly see sea pens in soft sediments like this, but usually they do need to be attached to something. So it probably means there's some hard structure underneath this fine soft sediment that they're attached to. Just like the corals that hopefully we'll see later in the dive attached to hard sediment. You see that these have a number of polyps. They're feeding in a very similar way to corals. Those polyps are catching particulates and small organisms that are going by in the water current and stick to those polyps, and then that's food for the sea pen.
And just a few minutes ago, we saw from that little scoured area that it was a little more consolidated beneath this surface loose sand area. So once sediment gets buried, it gets compacted, and sometimes fluids help to cement together the particles. And so perhaps that's that relatively hard underlying substrate that
I see it.
Stephanie was suggesting would be the attachment part.
And Scott France has added that he thinks this is Anthopilium.
We can get it on the front right side.
Oh, yeah, the sea pen that we were looking at, I think.
You want to go for zoom before he swims away?
And we have our first tripod fish. He's trying to get away.
Bathypteroids. Isn't that the genus?
I am not sure.
Right,
if we have any fish experts on the line that can help us with this, with the genus at least of the tripod fish.
Just went further in the path we're going, so try again.
We're likely to see a lot of these, right? We saw many in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes, especially on the soft sediment.
Mm-hmm. Watcher, do you have any interest in zooms on this tripod fish? If we see a lot, is that just want to keep going or pause for a moment? Copy that.
Right. If that's the case, I'll call in another move. Keep rolling.
Yeah, sounds great.
I'm going to adjust it a couple degrees to 325
Swim
rather
crinoid
than 328.
coming straight at you.
Another 30 meters coming up.
Copy that.
Bridge, this is our
This is great. You can see
I'd like to make another
Brittle
move
star.
of 30
swim
meters
away from
at
something or swim towards
325
something.
degrees, a speed of 0.2.
These are usually
So
benthic
that works
crawlers.
Okay, yeah,
I love
that's
seeing
30
this. It's
meters
great.
bearing 325 degrees. Speed
Yeah,
decimal
that's
two.
really amazing.
Good copy, Bridge. Thank you.
You're welcome.
pretty efficient
He's
swimmers. I
doing
don't
the
think
breaststroke.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think
It's
I've
like
ever seen a brittle star swim
That is
before. It's
really
cool.
interesting.
Switched on me.
Looks like he uses one of the arms as a rudder
It's going away from you.
and the other 4 as propulsion.
ROV nav bridge, move initiated.
Copy that, bridge. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Definitely a first for me.
Yes, me too.
Matching really fast.
Yeah, first for all 3 of us.
Full light.
Cool.
Let's leave them.
And goodbye.
That's got to be a pretty efficient, well, I don't know about efficient, but the best way for a brittle star to travel long distances, because they can crawl fairly fast, but they can't really cover a lot of distance that way. But if they need to move to a different spot because there's not much food where they're currently sitting on the sediment, looks like they could just pick up and maybe get carried a little bit by the currents, let themselves sink back down, and hopefully find some more stuff to feed on.
Go ahead, co-pilot. Or go ahead, Deck A.
Hey, I wanted
Yes,
to put the temp sensor housing back on the storage drum. So I wanted to establish
It sounds like
contact
several
first.
people in the chat room
my
have never
hand's off
seen
the
this,
stick.
so this
I
is
still
definitely a
got a few
highlight to
minutes
see a
left
brittle
in the
star
hangar, so-
swimming in this
Okay,
But
in
I
the
will
water
call
column.
when I'm ready to do it.
sounds good.
And Scott France says, given the right impetus, I guess anything can swim to
Yeah,
escape.
snap it real quick. Washley, do you have any interest in this?
That looks like one of the heart urchins.
That looks like a test.
Yeah,
That's
it's
not
not a
Yeah,
test.
no, he's not going to go anywhere. But this is what Scott France suggested earlier would be the maker of the burrows that we've seen across the seabed.
Do you want better zooms of this, Washley, or do you want to keep moving? Copy that. All right, video whenever you're happy. Keep moving. Yeah, dead center. Yeah, quick zoom.
Yeah, Watchley, this is Nav. We
There's
are
a piece
making
of
our way towards the
sargassum
escarpment now.
that obviously started at the surface of the ocean and now has come down through the water column and is looking like tumbleweed.
Yeah, that sargassum has floats that keep it at the surface, but I guess this one, the floats are no longer functioning, so it's sank down, and that can be a really great source of food for some of the animals down here. So if one of these animals comes across that, it's probably going to be a big meal for them.
And we have another pancake urchin here.
Small fish, center screen.
We're going to start heading toward
water?
our first waypoint along the scarp,
The one moving
at the
quick.
foot of the scarp,
Video. Yeah, he's gone.
unless we come
Like that
across
was on the
anything
right.
particularly unusual. But we definitely want to
see
get to
something?
some
Yeah.
of that hard bottom area that
Is it just
and
down
the
here or
steeper
something?
slope.
Rail growing there.
Coral or
Okay.
sand or something lower right.
The light colored. Yeah, copy.
And Ken Sulak, formerly of the USGS, he's now retired, fish expert, deep sea fish expert,
come in
said
on
that the
that
tripod
video.
fish that we saw before was probably
That's probably one of
Bathymetry
those super tiny
phanex
hooks.
or
I'll sit down.
quadrilophilus. Quadrilophilus, sorry.
Easy for you to say.
Oh, it's not, obviously.
Don't leave that in the hands of a
Science.
geologist.
Yeah, scientific names are not always easy to say.
Better written.
Yeah. And is this
Is
another
this a little-
pen?
Not a seapen.
No.
All right, video, I think you can come on in.
Slight tilt down.
Slight tilt
Is it a
down.
chrysogorgon?
I think it's a. Oh, it looks kind of like an Acanella.
Let's see if Scott. Yep.
Yeah.
Acanella. Rachel Bassett agrees with that. I know
Looks very pretty.
I don't know if Scott France can.
Confirm.
Acanella bamboo coral. Yes, confirmed by Scott France.
I learned a curl.
Great job, Stephanie. So it's interesting to
It'll be
find that
one
out here
for
on
me.
the soft sediment. There must be, as Stephanie said
Yeah,
earlier,
let's try that.
some kind of little
Here it comes.
hard rock or something that this coral settled on and
There's the
attached to.
color.
Yeah. It could be a large rock underneath, or it could be a fairly small rock. It just needs something that'll
Go full
that'll
screen.
allow the animal to
Look
stay
at,
upright
AZ2
so it can capture food.
light
This one
blue.
has a shrimp hanging out on it.
Tilt up the shrimp.
And Scott France corrected us that this species actually can root in the sediment and doesn't
Oh,
require
okay.
a hard substrate. So
All right.
that's why we see it here. Makes a lot of sense.
Looking at you, 65 ships underway.
6'5".
So this species of coral must have a sort of an
Boogie after this.
extensive
Full
rooting
screen.
structure in order
Yeah,
to
looks like
allow
we
it
have another
to
5 meters in that move.
stay
It's gonna settle out.
attached within the soft sediment.
Hold that.
Yes, Scott France pointed out that the base of the skeleton forms a big root system,
Hey, video's clear.
All right, go ahead, come
or
on.
at least enough of a root system to
Lights
keep it upright.
Yeah.
Well, that was
Lights
an
coming
exciting
out.
find.
And lasers coming back on.
If you're just tuning in, earlier we learned that these little mounds that we're seeing on the sediment may be where beaked whales have touched their noses to the seafloor in
There's
search
a burrow
of
in
food.
that one on the
Very
right,
interesting.
straight ahead. On the right side, looks like it's got a hole in it.
Copy. Let me go for a quick zoom video, see if there's anything inside. Actually,
You can see
come
how
out a
these
little bit and I'll rotate.
mounds have been a little consolidated.
Copy.
So that might be from
Lasers are clear.
currents. I'm not really sure.
Lasers off.
Oh,
Or they may just have been exposed by
Co-pilot
currents
winch.
wiping away the sediments around them, and we can
Go ahead,
see
winch.
some sort of
Am I safe to install the temp sensor?
crustacean.
Yeah, hand off the stick.
Roger that.
yeah, that
Installing.
looks like a squat lobster. Possibly genus Munida.
The video's clear.
Copy that.
And something to just generally point out is that
You can come on whenever you're happy.
we may be able to get to the genus level with an ID from the video that we're seeing, but often it's very fine details that are required to be examined to tell the actual species. And that doesn't come
Co-pilot
from
winch.
the
Go ahead.
video. We
Temp
often
gauge
have to
is
collect
installed.
specimens to
I
actually
am
let
clear of the winch.
the
You are free to
taxonomists
move.
get a better look at the species
Thanks, Mitch.
before we can be certain.
So for something like a squat lobster, that would be, maybe, I'm not a squat lobster expert, but
urchin.
maybe counting segments or counting little CD along the claws or something like that, which is why it's really difficult to, or impossible to do that just looking at the video.
And also their mouth parts, they have lots of sets of mouth parts, and you have to look at each one of those. And
The shape and number of the mouth parts, things like that. So
okay, Les Watling said that the shrimp that was on that Acanella bamboo coral was probably Bathypaleomonia seripalma.
it sounds like that must be a common relationship where you find this particular
Nav, what's,
shrimp on that
you say something?
particular
you're good.
coral.
I was
Is
saying
that
we're-
Bridge move complete.
I was saying we're
Copy
lined
that.
up.
I'm not as
Thank you.
familiar with
maybe
this
Les can
coral,
answer
but
that.
yeah.
I was just saying we're lined
For
up
us
well.
and
We
see
can-
if
I was
that
just
if
gonna
the
tell
if
Nav.
that particular
lined up
type
well.
of
We
shrimp
can
is
add
commonly
another.
found on
Keep rolling.
that coral.
Yeah.
Another 30 meters.
Yeah, sounds great.
Bridge is ROV
We
now.
just had the same thought at the
Go
same
ahead,
time.
nav.
I'd like to make another move. Same exact thing. 30 meters at 325 degrees.
Got a nice sediment
speed of
trail there.
0.2.
Yeah, again, this is from the
30
heart
meters, bearing
urchins
325,
that
speed decimal
burrow
Good
just
copy,
below
Bruce.
the
Thank you.
sand. And they leave that trail.
but you're just great device look like.
If this region were to be preserved in the rock record, we would actually see these trails, and we call those trace fossils. And they're not fossils of actual organisms, but they are indicating behavior of organisms. So burrows, grazing marks, a variety of indicators of organism behavior, and certainly of their presence. And different organisms may leave different types of trails or burrows. You know, some of them live in the sand. Some have straight burrows. Some have J-shaped burrows. So in the rock record, these often get preserved, and they help us understand the environment, but also maybe who lived there, even if we don't find the actual fossil of the organism. It's really flat out there, and that's telling us that there's very little current here to push the sediments around. The burrows are being nicely preserved. They're not being blown away by currents. So
dropped a little bit.
It may change. We've seen indications of some currents, but right now there's not too much.
That looks like a Venus flytrap anemone.
Yeah, it does look
That's
like
cool.
one.
It must be on the stalk of a dead coral, I imagine.
So is that Cnidarian, perhaps? Oh, and there's a...
Oh, there's
is that a
still
crinoid behind it?
There could be a crinoid behind it.
Yeah, it
looks
like
that
it.
one little stalk of a dead coral is making a big habitat for several types of organisms.
Isn't that interesting how they just flock to make habitat? Other organisms flock to anything that has found
that they
a
can
home.
attach to.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sediment trails, Scott France pointed out that seeing so many of those, and that means there's a fair number of these heart urchins, it also means that there's a lot of food to eat in these sediments. So
Yep. There's a brittle star at the base also, and certainly one crawling up nearby, but there's a small brittle star at the base.
So a lot of food that these brittle stars that are crawling around are eating is material that is produced at the surface of the ocean and then slowly sinks down. So like Scott mentioned on the chat, and the fact that there's a number of heart urchins burrowing partly through the soft sediment here means that there's quite a bit of input from the upper water column into this particular area.
The thing that you guys thought was a crinoid, is that possibly a coral, possibly a carnivorous sponge?
Behind this Cnidarian?
Seems to actually be part of seems to be creating the stalk.
Can't really tell.
It does look like there might be a sponge to the left of the stalk that the anemone is attached to.
ROV nav bridge.
Partially hidden
Go ahead,
right
Bridge.
now. Oh, I see it at the very base.
Having a lot of trouble moving in the direction that you want because the current's coming from that direction, like pushing against it. So I'm gonna let it continue to go on this position move, but then maybe I can adjust my heading to starboard to kind of
Well, actually, do you
point
happy with
more
this?
into it, so we're not moving directly in a lateral fashion.
Copy that, Bridge. Just let us know when you're done with that move, and then we'll shift the rotation of the ship, and then we'll move forward from there.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, video, come on.
So now you see the
Watch the
red laser beams. Those are 10 centimeters apart, and they are used as our reference measuring device.
And the stalk that we saw the Venus flytrap anemone on, that might actually be a hydroid. Thank you, Tina.
Which is another type of Cnidarian. So a Cnidarian possibly that created that structure, and then later on that Venus flytrap anemone found that as a good attachment point for itself.
Watch lead, this is Nav.
That particular burrow looks very fresh compared to some of the other ones we just passed over.
Just wanted to let you know that we've completed 100 meters.
We've now completed 100 meters of transecting towards this scarp.
To the left.
Seen a lot of interesting organisms in this area. It's actually fairly productive for a sedimented area.
Looks like there's possibly another coral just to the left of the lasers. Might be the same one, same species that we saw earlier.
Similar, doesn't it?
Acanella bamboo coral.
Looks like it also has a shrimp in it.
And it's interesting, Scott said that shrimp wasn't a usual commensal for this species of coral in other places. That's very interesting.
Do we have an ID on some of these brittle stars that we're seeing? Is anyone familiar? Oh, I'm just seeing.
Do you want me to follow you over?
No.
Very good.
I'll come back right after this. Just in my light pool.
Pilots, just so you're aware, after this next move, which should be done in a couple meters, the bridge asked to change their heading more towards the starboard so that we can make these moves a little bit easier. So once that move is completed, they'll call down and then they'll change it.
Copy that. All right, video come wide. Thanks, staff. All right, co-pilot, I'll come back to you.
You can see the skid mark. Pilots are great at touching down without disturbing, making clouds of sediment that would get in the way of our video.
Leslie, did you talk a little bit about that earlier? I know you've talked about the sediment a little bit, but just how fine some of this sediment is, and so when it does get disturbed, it can stay in suspension for quite some time.
Yeah, that's very true. We won't be able to get a sediment sample, unfortunately, because there is plenty of fine material in there. And at this depth, a lot of the fine material are microfossils from organisms that live in the sea surface, and along with those giant pteropods that Stephanie loves, and I love them too, actually. And even the small microscopic, they're very fine. They're the size of very, very small grains of salt, maybe.
Together?
And when they die, their shells settle onto the seafloor. And we don't have a tremendous amount of influence of sediments from the land this far out. So we don't see as much of the sand, the quartzes, and things like that you might find on a beach. Most of this material is biogenic in origin, or from organisms.
So Ken Sulak was telling us that some of these pancake urchins that we're seeing out here actually have a commensal fish that lives underneath the spines. So you're going to see, especially in this kind of place, you see a lot of different partnerships, I guess you could say, between different types of organisms where there's the shrimp living amongst the branches of the coral, or this fish that's living within or underneath the spines of these sea urchins. You can see it's a pretty wide open habitat generally down here in this flat, soft sediment area. So animals have developed ways to have a place to inhabit.
Go ahead.
Get clear lasers.
Absolutely.
ROV nav bridge.
Go ahead, Rich.
We're just about done that move now. Would it be a good time to switch the rotation?
Yes, definitely. We are ready for you to go ahead and change your heading.
Okay, I'll switch the center of rotation and adjust the heading to start.
We just turned off the lasers, but
Thanks.
they showed us that he's only about 15 centimeters from
keep him centered.
tip to tip of the fins there.
The bridge is also changing their center of rotation, pilots, and then they'll switch it back once the move is
center
complete.
rotation.
And that,
where?
I wonder if
To
that's
the
his
ship.
burrow over there right
not
next
while
to
we're on
him.
bottom, generally. Unless they really need it, and then we need to be paying close attention.
I believe they need it. They said the current's pushing pretty hard.
Okay. Let me come up. Are you already starting all that?
Yes,
tight
they are.
to his eye,
Yeah.
How far are they going?
drifting backwards.
They're moving, I want to say, like 10 to 20 degrees to starboard.
The ship is taking a slight move now, so we're going to hang out and let everything settle. Anybody have interesting thoughts about this skate?
You're going to have to follow
Any
a little bit.
identification ideas?
Ship's gonna be shifting towards
Ship's
closer to the
doing what?
north. Shifting, it's changing its heading farther north. So we're going to swing.
It's going to swing.
I'm
Oh,
going
so
to swing a little south, so just keep an eye, make sure you just stay on the screen if I move a lot.
copy that.
We'll need help with some of our fish IDs.
Wash, do you want me to keep pursuing this or move on?
Drifting back pretty far.
Yeah. Alright. You can wide video if you're happy.
Okay.
I found that fish
Set up, we
extra
can do that.
interesting because it looked like
Heading
it
change
was
whenever we're
actually
ready.
using some modified fins underneath. They're sort of walking.
Ooh, yeah, that's cool looking.
Yeah, certainly aiding in his maneuverability on the seafloor. Probably not
Just off
very
the
useful in
screen now.
swimming.
What are you looking at?
Yeah, but for small shifts,
there was
like we
some-
saw, where it's
Yeah.
just turned
There's an
away.
interesting little something
Ball
orange there. I
shaped
didn't know if
thing.
that was
Landing gear.
Alright, video quick zoom.
I imagine that's a serianthid tube
Yeah.
anemone. So there's just this little polyp type thing at the surface, but the actual tube goes down several feet or maybe even a meter into the sediment.
Video's clear.
Copy that. You come wide. Center my co-pilot.
So that tube anemone looked like it was only about 2 or 3 centimeters in diameter, based off the lasers.
Yeah, if you want, I'm just kind of floating around. If you want close-ups and anything, just let me know. Because when I say zoom in from like a distance, I can always get closer. It just depends if we want it or not.
Is that urchin different? It looks like it's got ballooned its spines.
This one right here?
And we got a note from Tina that said that was actually not a serianthid, but a normal anemone that can sit on the mud or on a small stone.
We'll do a quick zoom.
It's the same.
Yeah. I agree.
Optical
And this is why we have the team approach.
Yes,
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a large group of onshore scientists that are helping. Looks like at least almost 30 people that are on the chat room. And other people can call, anybody can call in when they want and tell us more about anything interesting that we're seeing.
So right there?
It's another brittle starfish.
Starfish.
Oh.
Sea star.
My mistake. Sorry, Gillian.
Yeah, that'd be great to do. Thanks.
So nice and unique legs.
So this is a sea star, not a brittle star, correct? Yeah, okay. Brisingid, yeah.
Yeah, this is likely a Brisingid sea star.
I didn't know they occurred on soft sediment, though.
I've never seen them on soft sediment, but...
ROV knife bridge.
Go ahead, Bridge.
We are done
and
with
you
our
always
change
thought
for now.
they only had 5 legs.
We can switch it back to
We are
the
dispelling
A-frame.
that myth.
Yes, please, if you don't mind switching it back to the A-frame.
Okay, we'll do.
Nice view of the tube feet. Not in action, however. He's not too disturbed by us, which is surprising.
Going full screen?
Yep.
Maybe this sea star recently had a very large meal and it's recovering.
ROV nav bridge, center rotation has been shifted to the A-frame.
Copy that, thank you.
Les Watling says that it must be reproductive, and that's why it's not moving very much. Also notice that there's several of the arms that are much thicker than the others.
You guys are.
Copy that nav. All right, video.
These organisms have the ability to regenerate their limbs, don't they? And so those are probably different ages of limbs. Some have been removed through predation or from whatever, and they have regrown them. So they're rarely symmetric. And we just heard from Ken Sulak that the small skate we saw, oh gosh, I shouldn't have started because I don't know how to pronounce this, Rayella bathyphylla. And the idea on any skates is difficult because you really have to zoom into the center of the back or the disc to observe the pattern of the thorns.
Okay.
At least it's a Rayella or Rayella. I'm not sure.
Another 30-meter moves at 325.
Thanks, Ken.
Sounds good.
That. Bridge, this is ROV nav.
Go ahead, RV nav.
We'd like to make another move of 30 meters at 325 degrees, a speed of 0.2 knots, please.
Okay, that's 30 meters, bearing 325, speed decimal 2.
Good copy, Bridge. Thank you.
ROV nav bridge, move initiated.
Copy that, Bridge. Thanks.
High voltage comp just dipped into the red.
If you've just joined us, we are on the seafloor.
Was it
at
we're at
17?
It was at 35, yeah.
Well, now we're about at 1710 meters water depth. We are far off the coast of South Carolina, along the edge of the continental shelf. Well, actually along the outer edge at a place called the Blake Escarpment. And we are heading toward our dive site that is a scarp or a steeper area that we hope to find exposed hard bottom, harder rock surfaces that will be suitable habitat for many coral, deep coral, and sponge species. And those particular organisms, when they find a home on rock substrate, they tend to attract many other organisms and define several of these deep sea communities. So we're migrating in that direction, and then we'll traverse up the slope. It's not a very steep area. It's the steepest we could find for this region. It's about, 14 degrees of slope. And then with time, once we get to the top, we will move along the crest of that feature. And I'm sitting here with 2 of my colleagues on board the Okeanos Explorer, Cheryl Morrison.
Cheryl Morrison from the U.S. Geological Survey.
And Stephanie Burke.
Sure.
Stephanie Bush.
Oh, how have I gotten that wrong?
Not very
Bush.
well.
That's okay.
You're just Stephanie to me. Stephanie Bush.
From the Smithsonian.
And I'm Leslie Sauter from the College of Charleston.
Clump,
Would this
right?
be more consolidated
Yeah,
mud?
that definitely
Oh.
looks like some sort of burrowed rock. You can see all the holes on it. Those are from worm burrows, likely. Now, where that rock came from is pretty difficult to say, but that little bit of hard substrate is providing a little habitat for a few organisms, it seems.
It's yellow on the left side.
Say that again?
It's a hull, sort of like a rock.
Yeah, almost like a shell. or
I'm
something.
learning
Oh,
that
wow.
this is probably a sponge,
Gonna get up tight on it so we can see the
perhaps a
edge.
dead one.
Yeah, give me a sec.
Is it, and that came in from Tina, what's the last
I'm
name?
looking at that lower left edge. I thought I saw some fuzzy.
Might get a little bit of dust.
And is it an encrusting
Go into it if you
sponge
want.
on
Right
the
between
rock,
the
or
ledges
is
are.
it the sponge? I'm not sure about that. It looks like there's some rock showing on the left side of it.
Yeah, now you can see that it looks like a sponge.
Now, yeah, that's definitely not worm burrows. You can see pteropod remains and some echinoderm spines in the sediments as well.
Going full screen.
Tina, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I believe it's Tina Molodzova.
Video's clear.
And
Right.
Tina has
Clear head
provided
and
the
come wide.
information that it's likely a dead sponge. Still uncertain, though. We haven't heard from her. Oh, there she is. Yeah, that perhaps it is an encrusting sponge. A demo sponge is what Nolan Barrett believes. Thanks, Nolan. I was just hoping it was a rock. It's amazing. We're feeling a little bit of swell up here on the ship, but of course you don't notice it at all on the sea floor, which is a good thing. The ROV has sort of a hovering second vehicle called Sirius, and there's a tether from the ship to Sirius, and then a tether between Sirius and Deep Discoverer, the ROV. And each has a camera, so they're both ROVs. And the cable, that configuration helps in keeping the slack so that neither vehicle experiences the swell that we are feeling up here. It's the first of any kind of swell we've even felt. While we've been out here, we've had really calm seas.
We might have another coral here, close to the lasers. Maybe another one of the Echinella.
We're gonna
This
start
is
off
the
with the
third
extra
of this
lights.
type we've seen. This is a bamboo coral we heard from Scott France and you. And there's
Oh,
one of the shrimp.
There's one of the shrimp.
Looks like it's a single family dwelling, however. And
Video can come on in.
each one of these, we've seen one of these shrimp.
And the shrimp,
Isn't that interesting?
the shrimp is, let's see, Bathypulmonea. That was from Les Watling